because we hope that this will be a resource for the community. The bookstores will continue to be a resource for the community where you can find some of these books, you know, on Mexican-American civil rights, and of course, Mexican-American arts and culture, including literature, poetry, everything, you know, visual arts, everything associated with our art and culture. So I just want to make some quick announcements on behalf of the Guadalupe. The sponsors for today's event are the City of San Antonio, Department of Arts and Culture, Texas Commission on the Arts, and then maybe I'm going to have Jose Luis help us over here a little bit with the sound. So it's Texas Commission on the Arts is another one of the sponsors. The Mellon Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and members of the Guadalupe, and then supporters of MACRI as well. The Guadalupe has a couple of events coming up. We have our Celebrando Tradiciones, which is the dance and music show of the Guadalupe Dance Company. I don't know if you all know, but the Guadalupe Theater, which we run, is closed. Now, it's closed for renovations. We will be starting renovations pretty soon. We're still finishing up the design process, and we expect it's going to be about a 2-year closure so that we can complete the renovations, but it's going to be completely upgraded since its last renovation in 1982. I think it was the last renovation there was in 1982. So, you know, so we're excited about all the upgrades that we're going to get in there. So we have our Celebrando Tradiciones, the Guadalupe Dance Company is going to be performing at the McAllister Theater. We have another theater program coming up, theater program, which is going to be on Las Carpas. It's going to be a theater show that we're going to present at Plaza Guadalupe. And then we have in February our author series, in March. We're already in March. Our author series, we're going to present Anel Flores and a couple of other poets. So we have lots going on. If you are not on our email list, please sign up. We have an email list up at the counter. So you can stay informed about events at the Guadalupe. And now it is my very, very distinct pleasure to bring up to the podium a good friend of the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. Like I said, MACRI has been a great partner, you know, since it started under the leadership of Dr. Sarah Gold. We are always very, very happy to partner in events with MACRI because, you know, we have, we believe our missions are so aligned and we're all heading in the same direction. So I want you to please help me welcome our good friend, Dr. Sarah Gold.
Thank you so much, Christina. I have to just tell you, Christina Bailly, all of the staff at the Guadalupe, Alma, the manager of the bookstore, everyone has been so wonderful. We are only in May turning 5. The Guadalupe has been with us for over 40 years, which is fantastic. You know, the Guadalupe is a national leader in presenting Mexican-American, Chicano, Latino, Indigenous, arts and cultural programming, a really vital organization in terms of preserving our cultural and artistic practices and passing them on to the next generation. So it is really an honor to be able to collaborate with the Guadalupe. So thank you so much for partnering with us in today's event. Part of the Guadalupe's history includes Mr. Juan Tejeda, who's with us today, the author of today's presentation. I'm going to read you a short biography. Juan Tejeda retired in 2016 as a professor of Mexican American Studies and Music at Palo Alto College in San Antonio, Texas. A writer, musician, educator, arts administrator, ex-Jefe Segundo of Xinachtli, the first traditional Mexica Azteca conchero dance group in Texas, an activist from 1980 to 1989. He was the Xicano Music Program Director at the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, where among his many duties, he founded and directed the annual Tejano Conjunto Festival in San Antonio, which in 2024 will be celebrating its 42nd anniversary. He is the button accordionist for the Conjunto Aztlan, and he and his wife, Anisa Onofre, are the publishers of Aztlan Libre Press, a small independent publishing company based in Yanawana that is dedicated to the publication, promotion, and free expression of Indigenous Xicanx literature and art. I just want to say, yes, Juan is a writer, a musician, a scholar. And I think that Juan in particular, I think part of the way I first met Juan was through his activism for Mexican American studies and just what he has done to help promote Mexican American studies at the community college level, yes, but at all levels. People like Juan have been working hard to get Mexican American studies in K through 12, as well as in spaces of higher ed. So, Juan's just a legend. So, I'd like to introduce Juan, the author of Mi CARNAL FRANK.
Excuse me. Thank you to Sara Gould, the Executive Director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, and to Cristina Valle, the Executive Director of the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, for hosting this reading and presentation here of Mi CARNAL FRANK. This is, the Guadalupe is my home, This was, I worked here for 18 years from 1980 to 1998. So as the Xicano Music Program Director, and I'm still working with Cristina and her staff to help produce the Tejano Conjunto Festival here in San Antonio. So I'm thrilled to be here in this capacity, which is a little bit different capacity as an author now, even though I've published a couple of other books that have been published. One that we did here with the Guadalupe, which is Puro Conjunto, that they have here for sale. I'm noticing that this is cutting out when I move a little bit the mic, but I'll try to stay stationary as much as possible. Y'all can hear me all right? Thank you all for being here. This is a very, very nice, intimate audience. Do I know you?
David Martin Davis.
David, hold on a minute. Before I forget, this is for you and Yvette.
All right, thank you.
David Martin Davies from Texas Public Radio, The Source program here at noon during the week. Thank you for being here, David, and Yvette, also his wife. In fact, I'm going to be on The Source on Monday. El lunes at 12 noon, so, talking about Mi CARNAL FRANK, the book. And in fact, his wife was just assigned to write a review of this book for the San Antonio Express News that's going to be coming out soon also, so thank you again. Carnal Nicolas Valdez over there, I see so many friends here. Carmen, thank you all for being here. This is very, very special for me. Veronica, who used to work with my brother Frank as an aide and assistant way back. And of course, Charles Cottrell, who was the president of St. Mary's University, and his wife, Abby, who are here. Thank you for coming, Charles. I think you knew Frank personally, and Frank went to St. Mary's University and got his BA in government political science back when. So thank you all for being here. Vincent Cooper back there, Manuel Garza, just so many friends. Judge Rosie here, and new friend, Judge Yolanda, who I just met today. So thank you all for being here. This is very special, and this book is very special to me. I started writing this book about, well, it was in 2006 when I was thinking, I was still a professor at Palo Alto College, that there hadn't been a book written about mi CARNAL Frank. And at that time, it had been almost 10 years since Frank had passed away. He passed away in 1997 at age 51, very young. So I decided to start doing some research, and I decided to start interviewing family members and friends for what I thought was going to be a book, which ended up being this book. And then collecting materials, first from my mom, who had all kinds of stuff, documents, letters that Frank wrote when he was in the Marine Corps and when he was in Vietnam. My mom kept everything. Excuse me. And so I got photos, family photos, and documents, and then I interviewed my sisters and my brothers and my tias, my tios, and then I stopped because my work with the Tejano Conjunto Festival and with Somos Mas, Mexican American Studies here in San Antonio was just taking up too much of my time. So I stopped for 10 years doing the research on this book until I retired in 2016. And when I retired, there were two projects that I wanted to work on. Primarily, one was the CD that my primo hermano and I recorded, Raíz Xicanx, back in 2018. And in fact, we had a CD release party here at the Guadalupe Theater. And then I continued, when I retired, I continued doing research, interviewing friends of Frank's and getting more documents. I wrote all of the institutions that he attended, which were, St. Leo's, Harlandale High School, the Marine Corps, St. Mary's University, the University of California at Berkeley, Bothell School of Law, and then when he was a state rep, and I'm going to get into that a little bit, during those first 10 years that he was a state rep on the South Side, he attended Harvard and Yale. He got Masters of Law from Yale and a Masters of Public Administration from Harvard. So I wrote all these institutions and got some interesting things back from them. Some they couldn't release because of privacy, but they did send me some interesting stuff, and it's in the book. So in this book, I have 127 different family photos and front page articles from the Express News and documents. I even have actual letters, the actual letters in Frank's handwriting that he wrote to my mom from the Marine Corps, and also from when he was in Vietnam. So you're gonna see all this. For me, the documents and the photos are just as much a part of Frank's story, maybe even more than the narrative that I strung together in this book to tell Frank's story. So what I'm gonna do today for y'all is going to be reading a few excerpts from the book, and then Armando and I are going to perform a couple of songs that are part of the book also. And then I'm gonna open it up for a brief questions and answers, and then hopefully you'll buy a whole bunch of books, and some for yourself, but also so that you can give away as gifts to friends and families and people that knew Frank. And I'm going to be signing here for a while. So let me start with this. I begin the book with an introduction and this short paragraph right here. Mi carnal Frank Mariano Tejeda Jr. was something else. Our oldest brother, a son, father, native San Antoniano, decorated Marine Vietnam veteran, lawyer, Texas state representative, Texas senator, and U.S. congressman when he died in 1997 at age 51. He was all of that y mucho más. And while he passed away at a relatively young age, he left a lasting legacy as a public servant, leader, and legislator who developed a strong and influential political alliance known as the Southside Coalition, and who for almost 20 years was considered one of the most powerful Mexican-American Chicano politicians that San Antonio and Texas have ever known. It goes on from there in the introduction to tell what I basically told you earlier, that my research, the years, all of us in our family, I also contextualize our family, my mother and my father's life, our grandparents' lives here on the south side of San Antonio. We have roots on our Martinez Tejeda side that go back thousands of years to the Coahuiltecan, Pajalate people that supposedly are related to the Payaya people who were here 15,000 years ago and called this place here Yanawana, spirit waters, because the veneros and the rivers here, and where people congregated to rest and to live, then formed villages. So I contextualized that. I wanted to tell our family story here so that people would know what gave rise and who gave rise to mi carnal Frank. I think that's very important. And then I tell Frank's story after that completely. But it's also, as the title it's a family memoir, because obviously I'm his brother. So I had to tell, in telling Frank's story, I had to tell our family story and our family stories about Frank, right? So that's why it's a family memoir and a biography of Frank. We all went to St. Leo's Catholic School on the south side of San Antonio. They're on South Flores from the 1st through the 8th grades, all 5 of our family members. Frank was the oldest brother in our family. And one of the stories that I mentioned in the book is that from the 1st through the 8th grade that Frank went to school, he never missed a single day of school at St. Leo's. Oh no, decía mi mamá, oh no quería mistear, como decía, ni un día. No quería mistear ni un día porque se le decía que iba a perder algo, or, you know, he was gonna lose out on certain things. So, one of the stories that many family members and friends talk about was when Frank was very young, about 8 or 9 years old. And I'll just go ahead and read it here. When he was about 8 or 9. A story that was told by various family members and friends was that one year, when Frank was about 8 or 9 years old, he wanted a BB gun for Christmas. So our aunts Emma and Stella bought him one, right? But our father was against it porque, oh no le vaya a sacar el ojo a alguien. That's where our dad was. So instead, my father bought him one of those smaller pop gun rifles. Ama wrapped it and left it under the tree. And on Christmas Day, when Frank opened his present and saw the pop gun, a little look of surprise and maybe disgust or even anger came over him. And he said, Pinche Santa Claus. That's, you know, he was 8 or 9 years old. That's the way Frank was. He wanted what he wanted. Ama got a little concerned over his language and reaction, but most people just got a big kick out of it and laughed when told the cuento. After he graduated from St. Leo's in the 8th grade, he took the test to attend Catholic school at Central Catholic High School and at La Salle High School. Y'all remember La Salle on the south side Catholic High School? Lima, Irma, and Mario Bribos here. Thanks for coming. And he passed and he got in. Because one of his friends, Hugo Arangua, he didn't pass the test, and he was going to have to go to Harlandale High School, a public school. Frank decided that he was going to go with his friend Hugo and go to Harlandale High School. And things changed for Frank when he went to Harlandale High School. Like I said, he didn't miss a single day of school at St. Leo's from 1st through 8th grade. And he was an outstanding student. He got all pretty much A's and B's during that whole time. When he went to Harlandale, though, they said, Primo Roger, that things changed. You know, there was thousands of students at St. Leo's. They were primarily, you know, Catholic school, smaller school, mainly Mexican Americans there. There was a few gabachos, you know, and maybe 1 or 2 blacks, but there were mainly, you know, Mexicanos, Mexican Americans. But at Harlandale, back in the late 50s, when he went there, 1959 through 1963, they were primarily Anglos at that school. Even though the Mexicanos and the Mexican Americans were making inroads and starting to go to that school, they were maybe about 35% is what Roger told me at that time. But the majority were still Anglos, and they had segregated hangout areas for the Anglos and for the Mexicans. And there were, my primo Tone and Roger tell me that there were fights almost every day between the Anglos and the Mexicans. He said that many a day they were up against the walls of the halls there, tirando patadas y chingazos contra los gringos allí. And then, to top it off, not only did they get into fights, because they said that the gringos were very racist against the Mexicans at that time. And of course, all of the teachers were Anglos. All of the administrations were whites. There was no, you know, curriculum that included Mexican-American history or textbooks that included them in there. And if they did, it was a very negative and stereotypical history. Of course, the Alamo here, you know, and how the dirty Mexicans came over and killed the heroes of the Alamo, right? That type of thing. So things radically changed for Frank from the beginning. Back at that time in 1959, junior high went from the 7th through the 9th grade, and then high school was from 10th, 11th, and 12th. So Frank got into a lot of trouble. He was getting into a lot of fights. And not only were they fights between the Anglos and the Mexicans, but there were various gangs out there on the south side. El Circle was the most prominent, but there was also La Misión, and there was Los de Villa Coronado further to the south side. And then there was like El Wali gang, Wali, for a Chinese grocery that was there in the barrio. Over there on Mission Road. And Frank used to hang out with some of the guys in their little barrio del Wali. So they not only had to fight the gringos, as Roger told me, but he also had to fight the Mexicanos, you know, ourselves. So So there were some very violent times for Frank, and he got into a lot of trouble. He started missing school, and he was hanging out with all of these. There was this urban Chicano Pachuco culture that was developing at that time from the 40s into the 50s that, Frank was part of that Pachuco culture. He liked to, in fact, El Primo Roger tells me that, they were our parents were, and our people in the Mexicano lived there were pretty poor. My father was a disabled veteran from World War II, and he was only making like $100 a month on disability, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Then she began working, cleaning people's houses, rich people's houses on the north side. And then she became a beautician, got her beautician's license, and then put a beauty shop right in the front of our house there. She used to take in children before the beauty shop to take care of to get a little bit extra money. So yeah, they developed this interesting hybrid Pachuco culture with their calo, language of mixture of Spanish and English and indigenous words, and their khaki pants and 3/4-inch sleeves or t-shirts and tangerine Stacy Adams or black Stacy Adams. Roger says that and he goes, and if you couldn't afford the Stacy Adams because they were expensive at this time, they would get the imitation Stacys from Tambacans. And that's what they had. That's what Frank had, right? And Roger and McGrimo and everybody, because Stacys were expensive. But then Roger said that Frank was the first one to get real Stacys. And Frank always liked to look good and sharp. Frank wanted the best of everything. And he wanted the best of everything for everyone. So Frank got into a lot of trouble. His grades went from all A's and B's to D's and F's, and he dropped out. Then he had to go to summer school to make up those things, those classes. He went to summer school for 3 summers. I mean, I got transcripts from Harlandale High School where he got a D- in Spanish. And Frank was, like all of us, were fully bilingual, And he has a gringo teacher teaching him Spanish, and he gets a D-. Anyway. One of the defining high school moments for El Carnal Frank in high school and one that would become a sort of urban myth and legend was when Frank punched out the gringo assistant principal at Harlandale High School his senior year. Some people say it was the principal that Frank punched out, while others, including later newspaper articles, stated that it was a counselor or teacher. What's also a dispute was the reason Frank punched him out. John Longoria said that Frank knocked a teacher out for calling him an impudent Mexican. In an Express News dossier they wrote on Frank in 1984, it mentions that he punched a school counselor who had broken up a fight he was in and had called him a troublemaking Mexican. Celia, Frank's ex-wife, said that he punched out the principal because he told Frank that he wasn't going to amount to anything. El Primo Tony, Mando's brother, swears that he was there in assistant principal Rittiman's office with Roger and Frank when, after Rittiman told Frank, "All you Mexicans are alike," Frank jumped over Rittiman's desk and hit him in the face. But El Primo Roger says that Tony, his younger brother, wasn't even there. Roger says He was with Frank when it happened. Dice Roger that the principal and assistant principal were very racist and would hassle them constantly. They called them the Tejeda boys and were always giving them tardy slips and wanting to suspend them for not attending classes and would send them to detention after school. During their senior year, they were called to the office almost daily. I guess Frank had had enough. One day when they were walking through the halls, Assistant Principal Ridman came up to them and started pointing his finger at Frank and telling him something, when Frank just punched him in the face y lo sentó, knocked him on his ass. Frank took off running down the hall, and Roger said, well, I followed Frank, I voy yo también. Followed him to the school parking lot where they got into Frank's 52 Chevy and took off to the San Antonio River. Frank knew he was in trouble, so they stayed out late. The story goes on to say that, they came back late that night, and Roger's parents and my parents, who were very closely right next door to each other, met him there, and my father asked him, ¿Por qué le pegaste? And Frank said, porque los alemanes no sirven, nos tratan mal. Frank and Roger, this was their senior year in 1963. They never went back to Harlandale High School. They were going to graduate already that year in 63 in May. Ama, our mother, had bought them their caps and gowns and the invitations and the photos and everything. But they knew that they were going to be suspended or expelled or worse. Roger's father, our tío Rogelio, said, "Chance que vayan al calabozo." They might have arrested him or something. They never went back. And then, Frank was 17 years old at the time. He already wanted to go into the Marines, but our parents wouldn't let him because the Vietnam conflict was heating up at that time in 1963, and he was underage, right, under 18. But then Frank came to the house one day with a Marine Corps recruiter and said that he wanted our parents to sign the papers. My father said, vale más firmar porque ya se le puso en la cabeza. And Frank said that the Marine Corps would help him pay for his college education under the GI Bill. So they signed. And that afternoon, same afternoon, Frank flew out of San Antonio to San Diego, California for basic training. I don't know why I get emotional with this story about Frank and the Marine Corps, but I think it's because I was just very emotional anyway with this whole damn book. I think it's because I know that he went to Vietnam. God asked for this. So as I said, included in this book are actual letters that Frank wrote to my mom from Vietnam. Once Frank joined the Marine Corps, things changed again. The Marine Corps, in a sense, leveled the playing field, so to speak, for Frank. And Frank excelled in the Marine Corps. He made corporal within a year. And then they prepared him to go to Vietnam. He was 19 years old when they shipped him off to Vietnam. They promoted him to sergeant when he was 19 years old. He says in a letter to my mom, he goes, most people don't make sergeant in their first enlistment after 4 years. He made it in a little over 2 years. It was thought to be impossible. He got promoted to sergeant meritoriously when he was in Vietnam. in Vietnam. He won the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and then posthumously, after he passed away, they awarded him the Silver Star for action that he did in Vietnam when he was wounded. He served 8 months in Vietnam because he was like a little over 3 months. He went for training in Okinawa before they shipped him to Vietnam. And he returned from Vietnam, a hero, but to a nation here that was increasingly, protesting the war in Vietnam, a divided nation, and where increasingly soldiers from the United States were coming back in flag-draped coffins. Frank, after 4 years in the service, he made staff sergeant. They released him 2 months early from the 4 years so that he could attend college, and he enrolled at St. Mary's University. As I mentioned, he got his degree, his BA degree in government and political science. He already, I think, had this vision of himself, and he really liked politics, even though he was very shy on many levels and reserved. 4 years at St. Mary's, he did great. He got his degree in government political science. And then he went to law school. He got accepted at the University of California at Berkeley, Boltall School of Law. 3 years, he got his law degree. During those 3 years, he decided that he wanted to be an officer in the Marine Corps. So he attended Officers Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia. And out of 900 people that started the program for Officers Candidate School to become officers in the Marine Corps, only 500 finished. Let me read to you this section here about that. When Frank returned from Vietnam and was discharged from the Marine Corps, he always maintained a relationship with them and served in the Marine Corps Reserves. After he completed his second year of law school, he decided he wanted to become an officer, so he signed up for the Marine Corps Officers Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia. He started the 10-week training course in June 1973 and completed it in August. Frank achieved the highest score in the history of the Marine Corps and won all 4 awards that they give out. They give out 4 awards, and the overall award, which they call the Honor Man of the platoon, he won all 4 awards. He was the first one in history to do that in the history of the Marine Corps. The Phil Yeakel Award for the overall highest average in physical, leadership, and academic categories, the Commandant's Trophy, Marine Corps Association Award, and the Marine Corps Educational and Development Command Honor. A San Antonio News article dated August 23, 1973, stated that Frank was the first man in history to accomplish this. The article continued. About taking all the awards, Tejeda said he was surprised. I just tried to do my best, he explained, but that was beyond my expectations. Frank got his law degree. He got married to Celia Gaitan, at that time had his first child while he was in law school, Anisa Tejeda, my ahijada. He returned to San Antonio in 1975 and immediately started thinking about running for political office. He had already gotten his feet wet while he was at St. Mary's University and began working as a community activist with Sanyo, and then got involved with his first political race when he was the campaign manager for Edmundo Zaragoza. The Harlandale School Board was all whites, maybe at times, and it was at that time that it was an at-large election system. Even in San Antonio for city council and for school boards, it was at-large. In fact, Frank wrote a paper in law school basically saying how at-large election systems were illegal and that the people weren't being represented adequately or the way they should be because of this at-large system. So he managed Mundo Zaragoza's campaign, and John Longoria, another friend of Frank's that went to St. Mary and gotten his law degree also, said that when they ran that campaign, Mundo Zaragoza was the only Mexican that was running for the school board. Frank was managing his campaign. He said that people were going around saying, "Vote Anglo." They were telling all of their friends out there, "Vote Anglo." Well, Mundo Zaragoza won that Harlandale school board seat, and my cousin Bobby, another one of Mando's brother and Primo Rogers and Tony's brother, said that this was an unheard of political event for Chicanos at that time, that they had broken this white Baptist theocracy, that he called it. It was the first time that Mexican had won that wasn't kind of the good old boy that they sanctioned to be on the board, and things began changing. Frank then ran for state representative from the Southside District 57B against an incumbent 10-year millionaire, Dramberger. And nobody thought that Frank could beat him. No Chicano had ever won in that district on the South Side. Well, Frank won. He made history again. There were parades up and down the South Side barrio, in cars and with Frank signs, and it was pretty exciting. At the campaign headquarters that night, and I talk about this, when they were celebrating Frank's victory, a local lawyer went by and andaba todo pedo, right? And he told Frank, "Hey, Frank, go tell your primo that he owes me money." And Frank told him, "Look, this is not the time nor the place for anything." Well, he kept necio, right? "No, you go tell your primo." So Frank just backhanded him, slapped him, knocked him on his ass again, ran him off the property with him and his friend. Police came, and everything. But así era Frank. Frank era cabrón, He didn't, excuse my language, but he didn't take no shit from anybody, especially if they insulted him or his family. So, as I mentioned, Frank went on to serve as a state representative from the South Side for 10 years. During those 10 years, he got his Master's of Public Administration from Harvard and his Master's of Law from Yale. And that Master's of Law from Yale, at that time, I think less than 1% of the law professors got into that program. Frank, in fact, started teaching law at St. Mary's University, I think specifically because he wanted to go to that Master's of Law program at Yale. Frank wanted to prove that we as Chicanos, as Mexican Americans, were just as good, if not better, than anybody else, any other ethnic group. Right? And he did. He did. Cuando se le ponía algo a Frank and he was going to do something, he did it. And he wanted to be the best at everything. He didn't want anybody beating him at anything. That's the way Frank was. He was something else. In 1985 and 86, when he was a state rep, he was chairman of the Judicial Affairs Committee there as state rep. And this situation came up with the Texas Supreme Court, where they were playing favoritism with some of the lawyers and having their cases coming before the Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court. Frank ended up subpoenaing all of them, including the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, John Hill. And this was at the time when he was running for Texas Senator against Tommy Atkinson. I name names all in this book, because I got all this stuff, a lot of the information from the San Antonio Express News articles that they wrote about Frank. So, and some people said that not only did that Texas Supreme Court case and those cases, here were the lawyers, these lawyers that are funding the Texas Supreme Court justices, giving them money, thousands of dollars to fund their campaigns. And then their cases were coming up to the Supreme Court, and they were, of course, going to get preferential and favorite treatment, and they did. And Frank showed how this corruption was going on with these justices at the Texas Supreme Court. They could have been indicted at that time and convicted for some of the things that the Texas Supreme Court justices did, and Frank proved it through his investigations. This led to some very important Texas Supreme Court reforms that happened as a result of that. So I go into detail about that case and other cases during that time. And it was that case that really propelled him, and he won then his Texas Senate seat. He served as a Texas senator for 5 years, and then they carved out, after the 1990 census, a new congressional district that went from here all the way into the valley. And Frank basically just walked in, became a U.S. congressman in 1992, and served for 6 years before he died in 1997. I'm going to close this part with one final reflection from the book. I got a little sick after the National Book Launch Tardeada on Sunday. There was over 400 people there at that event this past Sunday. And camaradas and familia, a lot of familia coming up. And I signed books for almost 3 hours that day, and coming up, taking pictures and hugging and all, and somebody gave me a bug. Anyway, I'm getting better now, but still a little congestion. So I end the book with this here, a few reflections on mi carnal Frank. And then I have an afterword after this section, and then las gracias, and that ends the whole book. I have a timeline, and then at the end of the book, timeline of Frank's life, and then Spanish to English translations, and the photos, documents, index at the back of the book. So I say, that's the way I will remember mi carnal Frank. Always helping others and helping us. Como nos enseñó a amar y criamos cisneros. Haz el bien y no mires a quién. I remember Frank as always wanting the best for all of his children, his familia, and his community. I remember his smile, his wit and will, his discipline and intensity. I remember his intelligence and sense of justice. He was an inspiration and example for all of us, especially when it came to the importance of getting a good education and his espíritu de servicio to nuestra comunidad. He wanted us to succeed and excel. We didn't always measure up, and that was all right, as long as we did our best. I remember I used to steal some of his Hermes aftershave or cologne when I'd go out on dates in high school. I still have a bottle of Hermes on my dresser and use a dab or two on occasion. The smell of Hermes always reminds me of Frank. I remember how his Marine Corps green fatigue uniforms and khaki pants dressed me during the University of Texas in Austin and Chicano movement years of the 70s. They were a little high water on me, but I made them work with my huaraches and botas. I remember in the early 90s when Frank was a state senator and our familia built and owned a little restaurant on Pleasanton Road called Aztlan Cafe, where we had live music and poetry. Frank would drop by right before closing time, around midnight, to check up on us and see how we were doing. I remember his final race for US Congress, after his brain surgery, after radiation treatments and chemotherapy, when he had lost most of his hair. Armando and I were playing some acoustic accordion y bajo sexto conjunto music at one of his events at his campaign headquarters, and Frank was standing there with some primos hermanos and friends listening to the music. In between tunes, he asked us to play the song Ya Volví de Vietnam, about a young Chicano soldier returning from war with a heavy heart. As we sang the verse that says, llegó ese día desdichado y no me olvido, que nos echaron una lluvia de balazos. Cayó mi amigo agonizando y me decía, amigo mío, quiero morir en tus brazos. Frank began to cry silently. I could barely see. I remember how I inherited the first Rolex watch that Frank bought when he returned from Vietnam and was attending St. Mary's University and working at Sanyo. He gave that watch to our father, who wore it for many years. When Daddy died in 1987, Ama gave it to me with a broken crystal and busted band. I wear his watch to this day. It's hard to believe that he's been gone for 26 years. It still hurts. I miss him. My primo Mariano Armando to the end with a couple of songs that are related to this book. So this is the song that I mentioned here that Frank asked us to play. Ya volví de Vietnam. In fact, my cousin Bobby, Mando's brother, and his other brother, Tony, both played with Santiago Jimenez Jr. in his first conjunto band. Bobby was playing guitar, Tony was playing drums. After Tony left the group, I started playing drums with Santiago Jimenez Jr. y su conjunto. I was 12 years old. I was back in the mid-60s. Santiago Jimenez Jr. was my first accordion teacher when I was 9 years old. And this song, in fact, Santiago Jimenez Jr. y su conjunto recorded it. And I think that's how all of us learned it. Mando likes to say that when Frank asked us to play this song at his campaign headquarters that day, that we had never played it together. Right, Mando? You say that we remembered the lyrics and everything. It must have been like, how many years, man? Since the 65 to 90.
We had never sang it before together. We had never done
96, 95? Over 30 years. We had never sang it before. Ya volví de Vietnam. 2, 3. Thank you. This next song, to close out the program, although we're going to have little questions or comments afterwards, was, your mic wasn't on? Orale, carnal. We were singing on the mic and Mando's not on it. Anyway, it was on. You can hear it? So this next song, it's that corrido de Frank Tejeda that's inserted into your book. I had already sent this book to the printer a few months ago, and I ran across this cassette tape from 1986 and a handwritten lyrics to the corrido de Frank Tejeda that Pete Bautista, who worked on Frank's campaign for senator in 1986, 21, first time for senator. And I played the cassette tape. I had misplaced this tape and these lyrics, and I played it, and the first part was erased, but then, you know, I could hear the rest of it, and I got the melody, and I was thinking, damn, why didn't I include this in the book? And I had misplaced it. I had lost it until after I sent the book to the printer. So I decided to take out a little conjunto arrangement to Pete Bautista's song, and we played it for the first time this past Sunday. So this is only the second time that we play the song. This is a corrido de Frank Tejeda. Maybe in the second or third edition, I'll include the corrido in the book and a couple of other things. 1, 2. 2, 3.
El día 4 de noviembre nunca se me va a olvidar. Fue elegido en San Antonio un hombre de autoridad. Frank Tejeda se llamaba y era del mero Southside. ¡Que viva el Southside de San Se lanzó para el Senado del Distrito 19 que él quería representar, a enseñar que sí se puede. Su amigo Pancho decía: Frank, que les vas a ganar a toditos los güeritos que te han querido parar. Tejeda le contestó: Francisco, tú eres mi amigo, esos de Corte Suprema y todos mis enemigos nunca me van a parar. Yo digo lo que yo digo. Su madre se lo decía: hijo de mi corazón, te lleno de bendiciones a que ganes tu elección y sigas para adelante con la ayuda del Señor. Madrecita de mi vida, gracias por tu bendición. Si la gente se decide, yo saldré de senador. La gente de San Antonio, con mucha sinceridad, eligieron a Tejeda para que haya igualdad y se asegure el destino de su querido Southside.
Thank you. Mi primo Juan Armando Tejeda here on Palo Alto College. Every time I sing those verses que su madre se lo decía, we just lost our mom about a year ago. In November, she turned 100 on November 12th and passed away on November 13th. And it's hard for me to sing, so thank you. I want to just open it up in case there are any questions or comments briefly. Could I get a little glass of bottle of water, please? Gracias.
All is prepared. Thank you for taking those.
This is a the civil rights movement here in San Antonio, and the Mexican American. But it's also your story and your family story. And I can, really the love that's evident to all of us. Y me hiciste llorar a mí también. Tell us a little bit more about your family. How many other siblings you have, and your parents, and I know you mentioned a little bit about them in San Antonio for a long time, but just give us a few more of the connections. I always like to know how many siblings people have.
Frank was our oldest brother, even though my mom lost a child and our father was away at war in World War II. My mom named him Frank Tejeda also. So Frank was our oldest brother, born in 1945, and then my sister Marialis, I'm the middle child, and then my younger brothers, Ernest and Richard. So there was 5 of us. All of us there, we all went to St. Leo's School, South Side, and most of us then a couple of us went to Central Catholic. My sister went to Blessed Sacrament Academy, and my brother Ernest went to Harlandale, where Frank went. Yeah, questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Just a comment. I think maybe the heaviness for Vietnam didn't come from a lot of Chicanos lost their lives. There were thousands of them. Kind of have a majority of them went wounded. You never knew back. Maybe that's what just a heavy thing happening.
In fact, that's why the Chicano moratorium of 1970 in Los Angeles happened, because so many Chicanos were being drafted and dying disproportionately over there in Vietnam. Of course, that turned into a tragedy where they killed the reporter, writer for the Los Angeles Times, Ruben Salazar, and a couple of other people in rioting. But yes, in fact, in the book I mentioned that I was at the University of Texas in Austin at that time when Frank was in law school in the early to mid 70s. And Frank and I got into a serious hassle one day because I told him they're sending, drafting all of us Chicanos over there and sending us to Vietnam, to die, and the rich gringos war, Pa eso sí nos quieren, right, to go die over there, while they're over here denying us our civil rights and human rights, and killing us in the streets here in the States. And Frank goes, this is in the book, you know what I think about that? And he spit at my feet. He spit at me and goes, I backed off a little bit. And I said, well, you know what I think about that? And I spit at his feet. I thought he was going to kick my ass. And I backed off. For a second, we just looked each other in the eye. And we just backed off and walked away. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if the principal, the administrators, and teachers from Harlandale, if they were around to see what Frank became at least initially. Do you know that?
I think that some of them were around. I'm not.
But you didn't.
I don't know who, or what the circumstances were, but I know a lot of them are probably still around. I probably remembered Frank during those
I would have loved to.
violent days. Questions or comments?
I don't have a comment, so my husband hey, let's go to a book reading. I've laughed, I've cried, I've gone through a roller coaster of emotions already. And then just to be able to hear, your service in education. I work in education, and just thank you for keeping the stories alive, for your being able to share your life with us, and and being vulnerable in a lot of aspects. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
I was curious about what your Carnal's relationship was with Guadalupe during the years and its, the development of this area too, and you as in your position here at Guadalupe for all those years.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I mentioned the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center in the book, but only kind of in passing, because I was very conscious of, even though it's a family memoir, of trying to stay focused on Frank's story instead of telling my story. But I do mention the Guadalupe in the book. And, I remember one incident in particular, or a time period when, I'm a South Sider, this is kind of the near West Side, and all of the politics that went on. And there was a clash that I mentioned in the book between the West Side politicians and the South Side politicians, right? And this book is also a story of how Frank, as I said, developed a very influential political alliance called the Southside Coalition. But he had from the start hassles with West Side politicians that went against him, particularly when it came to pari-mutuel betting. You remember that? When they wanted to get gambling here and betting. And that was back during his early years when he had just won for state rep in 1976, 77. The pari-mutuel betting bill came up immediately, and there were West Side politicians looking, okay, I'm going to mention names, they're in the book anyway. Matt Garcia and Joe Hernandez from over here, to start off with. So, one of the quotes in the book, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing it here, is that Matt Garcia said something, because Frank killed the pari-mutuel betting. It was in his committee, and it was his vote that killed, and they lost. Matt Garcia came out and said something, we're going to make sure that Frank is defeated next time he comes up for re-election. They come up for re-election every 2 years. There's another good quote in the book about this pari-mutuel betting incident that came out in the papers, that they asked Frank about it, that the pari-mutuel betting people, they had some big money people behind it, right? Behind that, because to have gambling here in Texas, right? And Frank said that he would have supported pari-mutuel betting and gambling if they would have given some money for education. That was one of his big issues, right? Getting equal education for our people, because he knew that education in this country and in this state was based on property. If you lived in a poor area, you were going to get less money per student, in that school district. So consequently, we got, the worst education that you could get. And us as Mexicanos, Chicanos, we're some of the poorest people here in the city and in the state and the country. So he wanted to change that. But anyway, the pari-mutuel betting people said they were not going to give any money to education. And they threatened Frank politically. They said they were going to make sure that he didn't win his election. Frank said, well, the gambling, pari-mutuel betting people threatened me politically, and I threatened to kick their ass immediately. Or something like that. It's not the exact quote. But the story I was going to get around to was that when the arts wars happened here in San Antonio, you were young. Your dad was on the board of directors here at the Guadalupe, Lalo Valdez, professor at UTSA. Bernardo Oreste was a city councilman here from this district. And Frank Wing was a city councilman for the South Side, and him and Frank were like this. Frank was his campaign manager when he first ran. By the way, Frank was instrumental in the Southside Coalition of implementing single-member districts for the city of San Antonio and for the school boards. So this was the first election that San Antonio City Council were going to be elected by single-member districts instead of at large. So Frank backed up Frank Wing. Frank Wing won.
So one time, I was the editor of Donancing here, the magazine, and I put a picture of Frank Wing for something that he was at one of our events or something. Bernardo Liste got really pissed off. He wanted, this was in his district, he wanted to be the only boss. He wanted to be able to hire people here. He wanted to be able to dictate what we did, what program, who got hired. He got pissed off that I put a picture of Frank Wing in it, and he came after the Guadalupe. He came after and tried to defund the Guadalupe. Yeah, he came after us hard. So we went to war against Bernardo. And then during that time, he made some comment about me or something, and then Frank jumped in, right? And him and Bernardo got into this hassle in the media, right? About at each other. And really, that's the only time I really remember that something significant happened where Frank jumped in to back me and the Guadalupe against Bernardo Este. Eventually, Bernardo Este lost the following election after he was, you remember what happened to Bernardo? You remember those years? Don't say it? Yeah. He was part of Brackenridge Park with his aide, and he left her there. He took off running and got out. You remember that thing? It was a whole scandal. He lost the following election, and then he was censured by city council and banished to Houston, where he went and got his law degree. Questions are coming. That's going to be in my memoir that's coming up next. But the importance of cultural arts centers like the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center and Chicano Mexican American Studies. I got some stories to tell. Questions or comments? Nada?
I don't think that would keep you from political office.
The what?
I don't think something like that would keep you from political office.
For me?
No, from having a party.
It wouldn't.
It wouldn't matter.
Oh, nowadays, right? Yeah, well, you know, here we have a wannabe president again that maybe if we switch to the Republican Party. Do you have a question, Bill? A comment?
Something that I may have asked you before, but maybe I didn't get a good answer from you. I didn't mean that in a bad way. But what was it like when you were really young and Frank being about 8 years older than you?
What was it like?
What was it like to have an oldest brother like Frank when you were about growing up?
He was always a role model, you know, for us on many different levels, even during the years at Harlandale High School that I remember, first kind of consciously remember Frank. I don't remember so much of the St. Leo's years, but in high school I do. In fact, one time I mentioned it in the book, he had the only dance, kind of party, I don't know what kind of party there in our home. That was the only time that it happened. And they had, my parents and everybody had moved the furniture in the living room to the side. My tias had made some punch. And then all these, you know, Chicano couples from Harlandale, Frank's friends came over and they had some oldies playing on the record player, you know, like In the Still of the Night, or Daddy's Home. They were all dancing cheek to cheek, right? We were lovey-dovey. That's what I said, oh, lovey-dovey. You know, the lights were down low, they had turned off the lights, and I remember the chavalon looking, you know, as our house, I was over on the side looking at him, and I was like, hey, get out of here, and I run off from there. And then my next recollection is that when he was in the Marine Corps, and he wrote letters home or would call, and but he was always a role model after that. Because, as I said, he excelled. He especially when it came to education and his you know, servicio to nuestra comunidad, right?
So I think in a lot of ways that's why all of us got, my sister, she became a nurse. I became, got, some degrees and became a professor. And my brother's also a teacher in the Harlandale School District, still Ernest. And, we were all, Frank was up here, our oldest brother. Questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You obviously had all these family stories, probably what encouraged you to write the book, but was there anything in your research that you came across that you were not expecting to come across?
Good question. And I mentioned this in the book also. At the very end, my mom was still alive when I finished the book. And I said that I hope Ama, she was going to be 98 years old at the time. I said, I hope Ama is still alive to see this book published, right? Well, she passed away right before it was published, so I mentioned at the end that after I had done my initial kind of draft, I printed 2 copies of the book, one in paperback and one in hardbound, and I gave it to Ama so that she could read it. And Ama said she liked it, but that she thought that all that violence that I mentioned in high school, that I should take it out. And she was very adamant that I should take out one particular passage in the book that she said, que estaba muy feo, and that it was unnecessary. And I took that out of the book. What was it? I don't think I'm going to tell you. Even though it's true. I'm going to leave that a mystery right now. Because Ama didn't want me to tell you. She said, no, que feo. Todavía viven la persona y su esposo y la familia y los hijos. No me van a decir. They're probably going to read the book. So I left it out. Anything else that what did you say that was?
That you were surprised to find.
That I was surprised. I can't think of anything right now. I'll tell you the truth, Frank. There wasn't anything that Frank did that surprised me. He was hell on wheels, he was tough. He wasn't, I knew about a lot of these violent incidences in high school and afterwards. That, John Longoria, and I mentioned this in the book too, he said that he and Frank were trying a case right now in front of the judge. And that somebody behind Frank started telling Frank something. And I don't know what, I asked John, what did he tell him? And he goes, I don't know. John says, the next thing I know, Frank turned around and hit him in the courtroom. In the courtroom in front of the judge. And I go, this was the interview that I did with John. And I said, and John, what did the judge do? And he goes, he was like in shock. He didn't know what to do. And I said, well, what happened? He goes, we had to do some fast talking to get out of that one. I see that, Frank. And I said, obviously, he insulted him or told him something. And there was various kind of violent incidences like that happened later on in Frank's life. But as I say, that didn't surprise me because I knew how Frank was. He wasn't going to be insulted by anybody or have his family insulted by anybody. And he wasn't, he did that in the state legislature when somebody, that was said that he was going to back a bill
a state senator that's going to back a bill that he had, and then he turns around and betrays Frank, you know, and Frank called him out on the legislative floor out there and said, "Step outside now, we're going to settle this right now." And Frank went after him, and people held him back, and the guy kind of cowered, and they kind of broke it up. But yes, ma'am.
Sharing this information in this book is continuing Frank's goals in life.
I'm sorry.
Are you continuing to share some of Frank's goals?
Am I continuing some of Frank's goals? Yes, all of the fighting goals that he had. No. I hope that our family, our brothers and my sister, have continued Frank's legacy in terms of the importance of education. And I see that the work that we've done here with Mexican American Studies and trying to equalize funding for our schools and for our children has been very important. I've tried to continue that. And of course, trying to further our people, you know, and to show that, you know, we're a proud people, that we have a lot that we can give, and that we have given to this country and our community and our people in all races, that we are not inferior to anybody, right? Trying to get over it. Another thing that he seriously fought about was against the racism that he experienced. And left that legacy also, that we should stand up for what's right, that there ain't nobody that's better than anybody else just because of their ethnicity or race. So those types of things, I hope that we have continued through our work here in the community.
Has San Antonio honored your brother as far as, like, you know, maybe considering naming a school after him, a street after him, a center or something? Like, what have you?
And at the end of the book, there's like 20-something different things that have been named after my brother Frank. Post office, the Juvenile Justice Center, highway, 2 schools, parks, VA clinics, VA housing, you know, the list goes on and on. They're all in the book. But today, I was kind of surprised that Judge here, Yolanda, mentioned that there was a park in Elotes, Texas.
So I thought it was a different Frank Malta.
Oh, it's Malta. Okay.
I looked it up.
Yeah, because I thought I had gotten everything that been named after Frank is in the book. The Palo Alto Scholarship Fund, you know, got baseball diamonds, you know, just all kind of things. Because Frank did that, and my mom got all these stories, especially after he passed away in '97, that Frank did this, and he paid for our family's funeral services, and he gave thousands of dollars to the football team, and he put the lights up at the 5 Diamonds over here. That's why they named the parks after. All these stories just started coming out. And in fact, I closed with one of the stories that, you know, 23 years after his death, I asked my cuñado if he knew a good plumber, because, you know, I had a plumbing problem in one of my rental homes. So I go out there and I meet this guy, and he goes, "Hey, Tejeda," we introduce him. "Are you anything with Frank Tejeda?" Yeah, he was my older brother. He goes, "Damn, man. This was a long time ago." He starts into the story, and I tell the story. I was at the, what's the funeral home there on the south side, Mother? Brookhill. I was at Brookhill Funeral Home. That's where he had my father, in fact. And Frank was there talking to the owner. And I was waiting, you know, to talk to them too. I was on the side. And Frank told them that he wanted to pay for this family who couldn't pay their funeral bill, for some of the children that had passed away from that family. And he did pay for it. And he goes, "That always stuck with me." And does 23 years later, you know, when I hired a plumber, and we get stories like that all the time. Now with the book, like Sunday, people were coming up to me like I was signing, and people said, give me all these stories. Yeah, Frank did this, and, oh, I love Frank, and you know, he helped me. Just the other day, I think said somebody, I forget who it was, that Frank one time went by this lady's home that she was having problems. She had called his office or something. He personally went by her house. He was a state rep at the time. That she had, her roof was leaking. That Frank went, this was just Sunday. Frank went inside and showed me what's going on. So he took her inside, showed him that he paid for her roof so that, to fix it. And stories like that happen all the time, so just that.
I just wanted to ask, so when your older brother was first diagnosed with cancer, what was like not only your family's reaction, but his own reaction to it? Did he feel optimistic? Was it, I mean, having been once very ill myself, I remember coming home and my mother had lit all these candles, you know, and I thought, God, now the house is gonna burn down. But, so, you know, what did the family do when that happened?
It was a total shock, because Frank was very quiet, actually. I mean, he got, you would think he was quiet and shy, because of all these sort of violent things that I mentioned here, but he was very quiet and shy. He was very reserved. He didn't boast or brag, right, Veronica? And he kept a lot of things to himself. He never talked about Vietnam or anything, you know. So it was a shock, and I write about it in the book when we found out. And it was on his 50th birthday that I had a party for him in Guerra, and how he had called his wife and told him that he was going to have brain surgery the day after his birthday, his 50th birthday.
Was there anything?
He hadn't told us anything. And then after the party, his 50th birthday party, Celia told Mary Alice went and told Mama. And of course, you can imagine that he had a brain tumor. And of course, they don't know if it's cancerous or not until they go in. Mom called me the next day and said that Frank was going to have surgery and for a brain tumor, and I immediately went to the hospital. She said he's in the hospital. All of this is in the book, by the way, and we were there with him the night before they went into surgery, and me and my sister were in his room at the hospital when they came. The doctor came in. Frank, they rolled him in with his bandage, and he was awake. And then the surgeon came in, and when they told Frank that brain tumor that he had, that it was cancerous, and it was one of the most lethal cancerous brain tumors anybody can have, that the doctor was very cold. He said, "You are going to die from this." Might be 3 months, might be 6 months. It's definitely going to kill you. So he lived a year and 3 months after that. Sorry for being so emotional, but it's all very emotional for me. This whole damn book, I think of my mother constantly, not just Frank, but my mother. Can you imagine hearing that about your son? Your oldest son, your consentido. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate very much your expression. I appreciate very much you having written this book and given it as a gift to the rest of us. I just want to say that, and it's good that we bask in the level of acknowledgement of our people that have achieved so much. But I think we also have to stay aware, stay informed, stay alert, because I'm 74 years old and I've seen that we're going backwards. This stuff we're talking about, like, I guess it's the Texas Supreme Court, oh, guess what? We've got it all over again. Some days I wake up and I think, oh my God, this is 1968 all over again, or whatever. We have to stay aware, stay informed, and we do research, and stay involved, but get educated in terms of who we're voting for, not just vote, but make an educated vote.
You're right. Excuse me. What?
Cyber
Yes, look at all the political ads right now.
They're all about the invasion of these brown hordes and criminals and drugs and carteles and, who are these brown hordes, yes, los pobres inmigrantes that are coming from Mexico and Central America, right? But at the same time, they've just enacted these sort of, basically racial profiling laws against us. They see us as brown people. They don't distinguish. Now they can ask us, you got your papers? Right? They don't distinguish. They don't know whether we're immigrants or not. Right? Who do you think is going to take the brunt of that? And that's totally racist and racial profiling. In a lot of ways, we are going backwards, and we have to fight against that. And we have to vote against that. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to mention, don't be sorry when you cry. I think that the emotion just puts more into your story and how much you love your family and your brother. So thank you for sharing.
I know we've gone over time here, and I hope they keep the place open beyond 4 so we can sign up in books. Unless there's something that needs to absolutely be said or asked right now before we move on, I guess.
I just wanted to say that the books are for sale over here in the bookstore.
Right here.
You can purchase one here and one.
I'll be signing here. And I appreciate you buying these books, like I said, for yourself, but also for friends. They make great gifts. And I think all of our children and our people need to read about Frank's story and other people like Frank, because there are a lot of people like Frank in our community that have done a lot of very important work. So thank you again. Thank you, Christina, and the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, and the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, Sarah. And thank all of y'all for being here. Thank you. Appreciate it.